They escorted me out of the building I founded. My building, while I was still clutching the mug I had used every morning for 7 years. A security guard I had never seen before followed behind me like I was a threat to the carpet. He looked nervous, like he knew he was part of something wrong but had convinced himself it was just policy. That was 40 days ago. But truthfully, this story does not start with the mug or the security escort. It starts in a dim, overstuffed studio apartment with an unstable internet connection and a microwave that blew a fuse every time I tried to reheat food and code at the same time. I was 24. My name is Lyra, and back then, my entire life fit between a futon mattress and a whiteboard I had bolted to the wall with borrowed tools. I was the founder, the back-end developer, the data scientist, and on most days, the janitor. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. The night that changed everything, I was debugging a rudimentary version of a behavioral language model that I built using scraps of open source code and instinct. I had been tracking online customer sentiment, trying to find patterns in how people talked about brands. I had no money, no connections, just an idea I could not shake and a prototype that finally, at 3:42 a.m., spit out something useful. It was not beautiful, but it worked. And when it worked, it felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane I had built myself. 18 months later, that model helped a Fortune 100 company dodge a public relations disaster by predicting backlash over an ad campaign before it launched. My inbox exploded. My LinkedIn crashed. Suddenly, venture capitalists who had never replied to my messages were now trying to schedule urgent coffee chats. One mid-sized tech firm flew me out for meetings, told me they respected my vision and that they did not want to change a thing. They just wanted to help scale. They offered equity, funding, and a development team 10 times the size of mine. I was hesitant, but my fingers were numb from sleeping in a drafty room with broken heating, and the company's check had 6 zeros I could not ignore. But I did not sell the whole thing outright. I added something to the employment agreement. Something that at the time felt like a safety net I would never need. A clause buried on page 17 in clean legalese that stated, "If founder is terminated without cause, founder shall retain the right to repurchase original IP and operational assets at the original transfer value. $1. They laughed when my lawyer pushed for it. Symbolic, they said. Sure, if that makes you feel better, the CFO chuckled. I was not trying to feel better. I was trying to make sure I would never feel powerless. The first few months were good. I was in meetings I used to dream about. They gave me a corner office and a team with actual titles. We had funding, marketing, weekly strategy huddles. But the tone began to shift. Quietly, gradually. A new CFO, Brent, came in with spreadsheets and smiles. Then Vanessa, a VP with a background in organizational transformation, started attending meetings uninvited. I noticed changes in language. We became they. Iterate became rebrand. Soon they were restructuring teams, cutting R&D budgets, replacing senior engineers with cheaper hires. They got rid of my lead product manager. She was 7 months pregnant and vocal about strategy issues. They told me I was too close to the original vision and needed to step back from product decisions. Then came Trusty, a cartoon mascot they unveiled in a rebranding campaign I was not even invited to review. It was supposed to make the company feel warmer. What it actually did was make years of complex machine learning work look like a bedtime story. Clients started pulling back. A few of our legacy enterprise partners went silent. But Brent and Vanessa said it was part of the shift. I started documenting everything because I knew what was coming. I could feel it in the way people stopped making eye contact in hallways, in how meetings got mysteriously rescheduled without me. Then came the final blow, an internal email chain forwarded to me by accident containing the phrase, "Time to sunset the founder." They called it a strategic realignment. They said my role was no longer aligned with growth objectives. No one even used the word fired. Just polite phrases and a final handshake, like I had been some temporary consultant. I did not argue. I did not cry. I picked up my mug. I walked out past the glass conference room where my first investor had once hugged me. I said nothing. 3 days later, my attorney sent an envelope via overnight courier to their legal department. Inside it was a $1 check and a letter that referenced the employment agreement clause they had clearly forgotten. The message was short. Just 3 lines. I am exercising my right to repurchase all original intellectual property and operational assets. Enclosed, $1 payment. Effective immediately. They did not reply right away. I know they thought it was a bluff. I had no office, no team, no product infrastructure anymore. But what they did not understand was this. I did not need to start from zero. I just needed to start from me. The first email came just 8 hours after the notice was delivered. Legal wanted to clarify the scope of the clause. My attorney responded with 3 attachments, timestamped and signed. There was nothing to clarify. The clause had been reviewed and accepted by their own counsel 2 years ago, buried deep under the executive compensation terms. They had missed it, ignored it, or assumed it was unenforceable. It was not. And now they were scrambling. I did not celebrate. Not yet. I had the legal rights. But what I needed was the infrastructure, the people, the data, the trust. You do not rebuild a company from a single piece of paper. You rebuild it from loyalty, from memory, from the people who remembered what the original purpose was. So I started making calls. Janelle was the first to return mine. She had been our second data scientist. Brilliant, underpaid, and one of the first to leave when Brent gutted the analytics team. She had just finished a short contract job and said she still had the full version of our model saved on a personal drive, the final iteration before they diluted it with branding filters and pop-ups. Then came Dev, one of our old infrastructure leads. He had left quietly after a clash with Vanessa about server costs and performance metrics. When I explained what had happened, what I had done, he asked only one question. Where do we start? They came back one by one. Not because I promised money. I could not offer that yet. But because they believed in what we had built. They remembered how it felt when our product actually solved problems, when our clients used our platform to understand people, not manipulate them. We rented a co-working space with cracked walls and inconsistent Wi-Fi. It felt familiar. It felt right. Meanwhile, Brent and Vanessa were pretending nothing had happened. They kept releasing statements, updating their website, trying to maintain investor confidence. But the quiet panic had already begun. Word was leaking out. An analyst from one of our early venture backers contacted me. Is it true? He asked. I sent him a copy of the agreement. No commentary, just facts. Then came the real rupture. One of our former enterprise clients, a global retail firm that had been with us since the beta testing days, reached out to me directly. They had been dissatisfied with the new direction, especially with how Trusty had oversimplified sentiment tracking and eroded performance. They asked what my plans were. I told them plainly, I am rebuilding. Ground up. No shortcuts. Real-time analysis, no fluff. They offered a letter of intent to return, if I could get the platform stable again within 6 weeks. It was both a gift and a challenge. A real deadline. So we worked. Day and night. We slept on couches again. Ate noodles from paper cups. Wrote code until our fingers twitched. But this time it was different. We had experience. We had scars. We knew what not to do. I stayed off social media. I did not post vague victory quotes or subtweets. I kept quiet. Professional. Let them talk. Let them spin their narratives. Because I knew something they did not. The board had also received a copy of the clause. And not from me. From an internal leak. I had nothing to do with it. But I knew once it got to them, the panic would accelerate. And it did. A senior board member emailed me. Politely. Cautiously. Requesting a meeting. I told him I would consider it after our platform was live again. By week 5, we had the framework back up and running. No branding filters. No trusty mascot. Just clean, precise sentiment analytics built for professionals. We ran internal tests. Accuracy was higher than it had been in nearly a year. Clients who had walked away were quietly sending feelers. The ecosystem was shifting. Then came the letter. A formal statement from the company's legal department. They acknowledged my ownership. They confirmed the validity of the clause. They tried to include terms, transition periods, joint communications, some final compensation proposals. My lawyer advised we take our time reviewing it. I declined all of it. Because this was not a transition. This was a return. They had fired me without cause.
Laughed.
Replaced me. Treated my work like a mascot. And now, they wanted grace and goodwill on the way out. I sent them a brief reply. Ownership of all assets, IP, and client data previously outlined in the agreement will transfer effective immediately. No further negotiations are necessary. Thank you for your time. That was the night we opened the internal servers and saw how much of the original data they had corrupted. But it did not matter. Because we had the core. And more importantly, we had momentum. Clients started coming back. Slowly at first. Then steadily. The product worked again. They could see the difference. They could feel the difference. And Brent,
Gone.
quietly resigned. Vanessa followed 4 days later. Internal documents started leaking. Anonymous reviews appeared on forums and job sites describing the chaos, the desperation, the sheer incompetence they had left behind. We ignored it. Not because we were not angry, but because we were too busy building. We chose a new logo. A phoenix. Not because it was poetic, but because it was precise. Rebuilt. Not reborn. This was not magic. This was muscle memory. And in the middle of all this, I was invited to speak at a conference I had once been denied entry to. A major tech summit. Global press. Investors. Analysts. I walked on stage in a plain black suit. No hype team. No production crew. Just me. And the truth. I told them the story. Calmly.
Carefully.
I did not name names. I did not insult anyone. I did not need to. At the end of my keynote, I pulled out the original $1 check. The actual check. Framed now. Signed and dated. The room stood. I did not ask them to. They just did. Success feels different the second time around. The first time, it had felt like survival. A rush. A blur of caffeine and code, of saying yes to every opportunity because I could not afford to say no. But this time, it felt intentional. Measured.
Clean.
The platform was stable. Clients were coming back not just because of loyalty, but because the results spoke for themselves. They had seen what happened when the product was in the hands of people who did not understand it, and now they trusted us to do it right. Not louder. Not cuter. Just right. But I also knew something else. Success attracts noise. Copycats. Critics. And sometimes, worse, vultures dressed as mentors. Just 3 weeks after our relaunch, I started getting outreach from firms that had once declined to return my emails. Suddenly, they were deeply impressed by the turnaround. One sent me a box of artisan pastries and a note about potential strategic synergy. Another invited me to a fireside conversation about female founders. I declined them all. The board of the original buyer had been quiet since their executive shuffle. Too quiet. My attorney warned me. They may still try to come back. Not legally, they have no standing. But politically. Publicly. And sure enough, within a month, one of their former VPs published an op-ed in a mid-tier business magazine claiming that founders often lack the scalability mindset and that visionary leadership must eventually give way to structured strategy. He never used my name. He did not have to. I printed the article, filed it, and got back to work. Meanwhile, I started thinking about the future, not just of the company, but of how to keep what had happened from ever happening again. So, I called an old friend from my university days, Sonia. She had gone into corporate governance law and had helped draft frameworks for founder protections in early-stage agreements. We met in a tiny cafe near the park, and I laid it out simply. I do not want this company to become something I do not recognize again. Not if I step back. Not if I die. Ever. She smiled and nodded. Then let us build in walls. Smart ones. We revised our articles of incorporation. We structured founder equity in a way that could not be diluted without triggering a full transparency clause. We locked in a long-term product charter, Yes, an actual document outlining the values of how our core models were to be used. Not marketing fluff. Legal anchors. I shared it with our senior staff. Told them they had veto power if the leadership ever tried to betray that charter again. They looked at each other, then back at me, and I could see in their faces. They understood. This was not about ego. It was about integrity, about protecting the work. But not everyone approved. One of our new hires, an operations lead with a background in traditional scaling, privately told me he thought I was overcorrecting. You have to let go eventually, he said. No one builds something that lasts by clinging this tightly. I thanked him for his input, and I let him go, because I had learned the hard way that speed without purpose is just noise. And I did not come back from the graveyard of stolen startups to make something loud. I came back to make something that would last. In month 3, we launched a new feature, one we had dreamed of years ago but never had the resources to build. Real-time context analysis across multilanguage sentiment shifts. It did not just track what people were saying. It tracked what they meant in tone, in nuance, in silence. It was precise, powerful, and real. We tested it with one of our returning enterprise clients. Within 2 weeks, they prevented a potentially damaging brand backlash in Southeast Asia by catching a misinterpreted phrase in a campaign tagline. That client publicly praised the tool. Our inbound leads tripled, but we stayed quiet. No splashy ads. No forced virality. Just the work. Internally, we had changed too. I was not doing 18-hour coding stretches anymore. I did not need to. We had built something self-sustaining, something that trusted the team. I started mentoring again, this time with real boundaries. And I started saying no more often. And then came the invitation I did not expect. A global ethics consortium wanted to present us with an award for corporate integrity in technology. I almost laughed. Not because it was not deserved, but because of how absurd it would have sounded to my 24-year-old self, sitting on the floor with a dying laptop and a stomach full of instant noodles. I accepted. Quietly. I went to the event with Janelle and Dev. No PR. No press release. Just presence. At the dinner, someone asked me, "What does revenge feel like?" I paused. I smiled. It feels like rebuilding something, so while they have to pretend they never tried to destroy it. That night, I walked home alone. No driver. No entourage. Just quiet streets and a head full of clarity. Because here's the thing about power, real power. It is not about domination. It is about design. You do not have to shout when you know what you have built can stand without you. They always come back. Investors, I mean. The ones who ghosted me in the early days. The ones who passed on my pitch decks, dodged my follow-ups, or sent their junior analyst to take notes, and then never replied.
Now they want it in.
And not quietly either. One firm offered a $20 million Series B with a term sheet so clean it made my legal team pause. Another flew in a partner just to drop off a handwritten note and a pair of limited edition sneakers they somehow thought would impress me. One VC even tried the sentimental route, mentioning how they always believed in underdogs and felt inspired by my story. But I was not flattered. I was not angry either. I was aware. Because money, especially fast money, does not come without pressure. It comes with growth targets, board seats, and a push to move faster than you should. I had lived that before. I had watched what happens when funding arrives before alignment. And I was not going back to that. I took a breath. I talked to my team. We reviewed every offer, every clause, every potential compromise. And we made a choice. Not yet. Instead, we brought in one investor. Just one. A woman named Adrienne. Former founder. Quiet operator. She had exited her last company not through acquisition, but through a public listing done her way, controlled, transparent, and with the original team still in place. She understood what I meant when I said, "I will never sacrifice mission for margin again." We brought her on as a strategic advisor, not because she had the biggest checkbook, but because she asked the right questions and never once mentioned trustee. With Adrienne's insight, we tightened up our next phase. We did not aim for explosive growth. We focused on high-fit clients. We built out an education and ethics toolkit for companies to use alongside our platform. Real training, not fluff. Because what we offered was not just software. It was understanding. And if companies wanted the benefits, they had to use it responsibly. Some pushed back. One large retailer balked at the requirement for internal training before full integration. I told them, if you are not willing to learn how to listen to your customers, then our product is not for you. They walked. 3 weeks later, after a PR disaster that could have been avoided with our model, they came back. Quietly. But not everything was smooth. Internally, there were tensions. One of our newer hires, bright, ambitious, loud, started pushing for a consumer version of the tool. Something viral. A plug-and-play version for influencers and small brands. It will explode, he said. This is how you scale. And he was right. It would explode. But not in the way he imagined. Because that version of the tool in the wrong hands could be twisted. It could be gamed to manipulate sentiment, not just measure it. We had seen enough of that in the wild already. We were building trust, not exploitation. I said no. He pushed again. He brought it up in a product meeting, tried to rally other team members around it. I shut it down publicly. Calmly, but firmly. He left 2 days later. Posted a thread online about founder ego and missed opportunities. I did not respond. Because I knew the real opportunity was in doing the work well, not fast. But it shook me. Not his departure. The pressure. The reminder that I had to protect this company not just from outsiders, but from drift, from the quiet internal erosion that can happen when you start chasing applause instead of impact. So I doubled down. I instituted a quarterly audit, not of finances, but of alignment. Every team, every product line. We asked hard questions. Does this still match our mission? Is this solving a real problem or just creating noise? Are we being honest? Some features got shelved. Some ideas, as flashy as they were, did not pass the test. And that was okay. Because slowly, something unexpected started to happen. Other founders started reaching out. Not to pitch, not to beg for money, but to ask, how did you get it back? Not just the company, but yourself. I told them the truth. You do not get it back all at once. You reclaim it in pieces. One boundary at a time. One principled no at a time. One day of not flinching when they tell you to be quieter, nicer, smaller. And you surround yourself with people who are not afraid to remind you who you were before they tried to erase you. By the end of the year, we were stable, profitable, and something more powerful than either. Respected. Not just for the product, but for the values. We got an invite to a private roundtable with policymakers interested in regulating sentiment technology. I accepted. Not because I craved influence, but because I knew the dangers of what we had built, and what others might try to build without restraint. At that meeting, I was the only founder present. The rest were executives from firms that had scaled faster but burned brighter. I listened to them talk about growth, markets, engagement. When it was my turn, I said just this. Understanding people is not a growth hack. It is a responsibility. If you are building tools that shape perception, then you're not just in business. You are in ethics. Some nodded. Some rolled their eyes. But one of the regulators asked to meet after. We talked. And within weeks, we were invited to help co-develop guidelines for the ethical deployment of language AI across platforms. It was not glamorous. It was not headline-worthy. But it mattered. And that was the real revenge. Not in dollars. Not in applause. But in outlasting. In proving that the work was stronger than the people who tried to reduce it to a product with a cartoon face. The thing about building something real, something lasting, is that eventually, you have to let it breathe without you. I did not come to that realization in some dramatic way. There was no breakdown, no ultimatum. It came quietly one afternoon, when I was reviewing a roadmap presentation I did not write. It was clear, strategic, thoughtful. The kind of document I used to lose sleep over, now created by a team I trusted. And for the first time in years, I thought, maybe I do not need to be here every day. Not because I did not love it, not because I was tired, but because we had done it. We had built something that no longer depended on one person to stay upright. So I called a meeting. Just the senior team. The people who had stuck with me through the collapse, the rebuild, the skepticism. I told them I was stepping back from day-to-day operations. Not leaving. Not disappearing. But handing over the wheel. You could have heard a pin drop. I explained it simply. You have earned this. You are not just executing my vision anymore. You're shaping it. They asked if I was sure. I told them I was. I meant it. That night I went for a long walk. No destination. Just space. And I let myself feel it, something I had not let in for a long time. Peace. The next few weeks were transitional. I trained, documented, handed over. I met with each team individually. Not as a boss, but as a peer. I told them stories about the early days, not to glorify them, but to remind them that resilience is not a phase. It is a mindset. And then I gave my final internal address. I stood in front of our team, not hundreds of people in rows, just a tight circle in our main office, and I told them the truth. I did not build this company to keep it for myself. I built it so it could outlive me. So it could prove that it is possible to scale without selling your soul. They clapped.
Some cried. So did I.
Then I did one last thing. I went to the shelf where the original framed $1 check sat. I took it down, and I replaced it with a new frame, a copy of the company charter, signed by every employee, including the newest intern. Because that was the legacy, not the clause, not the revenge, the culture. I stayed on as chair of the board. I offer guidance when asked, but I did not hover. And as I watched from the wings, I saw something incredible happen. They made it better. They simplified workflows I had overcomplicated. They expanded features I had shelved. They negotiated deals that were smarter than ones I had once chased. And through it all, they stayed true. To the mission. To each other. To the values we carved into this place, line by deliberate line. 1 year later, I returned to the company, not as an executive, not even as a keynote speaker, but as a guest at our annual internal retreat. I sat in the back. I watched the new CEO, a product lead I had once hired for a 6-month contract, walk the team through our vision for the next decade. It was better than anything I could have written. At the end, she spotted me and said something I will never forget. Everything we are building now is because someone fought to take it back when it was stolen. The room stood, not for me, but for what we had all been part of. Later that evening, someone asked me, if you could go back to the day they fired you, would you do anything differently? I thought about it. No, I said, because they gave me a gift. Not the firing, not the laugh, but the reminder that no one, not a board, not an executive, not even a mistake, gets to define your story unless you let them. I do not need applause. I do not need a monument. I have something far more powerful. I have the knowledge that when they tried to erase me, I did not just come back. I built something they could never touch again. And that, in the end, was the real victory.